Welcome back to Performance Process. My name is Ronan McLaughlin, and I will be your host today again for another episode, sort of delving into my DMs after we had Tom Epton on a couple of weeks ago. We have a guest who knows Tom quite well today. We're here to discuss nasal strips. They're not exactly new, but they've been on the noses of writers like Fabio Aru, Chris Froome, and Peter Sagan in the past, and they seem to have made a reappearance or a resurgence over the summer at this year's tour. They are sold with promises of easier breathing and better oxygen uptake, or I don't know, some sort of increase in VO2 max. But for something so small and so simple, those claims seem rather big. So that's what we're here today to discuss. And I'm joined by coach and tech writer Andy Turner. Andy is he's the founder of ATP Performance Coaching. He has a first-class honours degree in sports and exercise science from the University of Gloucester. He's a British cycling qualified coach and ride leader. Andy, I could spend all day here reading out your how you're qualified to join us here today. But yes, you messaged me into my DM saying, I'm getting more questions about nasal strips. I've looked into them a bit. Fancy having a chat. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for joining us here today on the show.
No, thank you for having me. Any excuse to geek out on various sports science topics, whatever they are, I'm always up for that.
Yeah, listeners may or may not recognize your voice, but they probably will have read some of your work at some point. You have written, as I mentioned there, you're a tech writer. You've reviewed quite a considerable amount of stuff for the likes of Cycling News and Cycling Weekly and all sorts. And you're also a coach, which sort of led us to this conversation here today. Do you want to, for listeners who may not be aware of you, just give us a bit of your background? We were also chatting before we hit record here about some of the racing we've done together in the past and reminiscing on some good old days.
Yeah, so I held an elite British cycling license for several years and raced on the UCI team for 3 years, raced some events like the Ross, the Tour of Portugal, Tour of Britain, stopped racing in 2021 and now firmly back at it as a complete amateur. But yeah, in 2020, came out of university into lockdown, started my coaching business, ATP Performance, and then got asked to write some stuff with Cycling Weekly and sort of progression there. And now I've got about 300 published articles, I think, across various publications. And also, you mentioned with Tom, we started up Venturi Dynamics, end of 2023, beginning of 24. So I got quite into the aerodynamics side from doing some work for Rule 28 back when they sponsored the team I was riding with. So yeah, potentially a bit of a jack of all trades, not quite at the level of some of the masters of each individual topic themselves, but trying to get there.
Yeah, I neglected to mention that you're is it a wind tunnel operator or wind tunnel technician for Venturi also? So a man of many talents, and great to have you on the show here today. We're here to discuss these nasal strips. They've been around for as long as I've been around cycling, but they do seem to have grown in popularity over the summer, maybe thanks to Victor Campenaerts, and we'll get to him later in the show. But I mean, do you want to just kick us off just by telling us, for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, what is a nasal strip? So
you see these quite a lot in. It used to be quite common in the peloton. It had its little heyday, sort of early 2010s. It's the last time I remember seeing it in fairly regular use. You had Fabio Aru always had one over his nose, but turns out he needed nose surgery for a deviated septum. Chris Froome had, I think it was the turbine, the internal little like nose plugs, like the opposite of what you'd wear for swimming to stop water getting your nose. Instead, it pushes it out and helps with being able to breathe better through your nose. Peter Sagan had those 100% glasses, which had little magnetic stickers you'd put on your nose, and the nose piece of the glass would pull your nose open more. So they come back in force again now, and it's kind of more noticeable because one of the main brands that's marketing them, they're bright pink. So they stand out like a sore thumb in the peloton, which is kind of the point, really. Marketing 101 is make it stand out and noticeable. And yeah, I came into this very skeptical about the claims, and I mean, I still am skeptical about the claims, but ironically enough, there are benefits to them, just not necessarily the benefits that they are marketing them as, which not the first time that's happened in sports science and cycling product marketing.
Yeah, you mentioned you're somewhat skeptical of the claims around these. Do you want to lay out what the performance benefit or beneficial claims are?
I mean, the main benefit that seems to be pushed from them, and you're seeing from riders who are presumably sponsored by them, is increase in VO2 max, in peak oxygen flow rates. So the idea being that if you can dilate your nostrils more, you can breathe in a higher maximal amount of air, and more air there, you've got bigger pressure gradient, hopefully more oxygen perfusion in the lungs. So it's sort of hard to really put into words what they're trying to claim because it's so wrong.
Tell us what you really think.
I mean, the peak VO2 claim is complete nonsense, frankly, because at the point where we're talking absolute peak VO2 max, not at relative intensities. So when you're working absolutely maximally and you're inhaling as much oxygen as you can, utilizing your lung capacity to the absolute maximum, high breathing rate, everything like that, you're not doing it through your nose. You are breathing through your mouth. It's a much larger airway, and you're not really breathing through your nose at all. The pressure differential you're creating in the lungs to draw the air in, it's coming through the mouth. It's not going to go through the nostrils.
Nor should you be, I think, is an important point to make, because some of the social media around nasal breathing, which perhaps we should touch on as well, the benefits of nasal breathing, which I think at rest and while sleeping in that are, there are genuine benefits to breathing through your nose rather than through your mouth in those conditions. But trying to do that at high intensity exercise is not a good idea.
No, it's all entirely circumstantial, really, with the whole nose breathing side of things. Trying to do it at high intensity, the only theoretical benefit you could be getting from that is you potentially have to increase your inspiratory muscle force and respiratory to be able to breathe out again as well. But if you're trying to complete peak power efforts and achieve the training stimulus that you're trying to achieve from those efforts, making it harder to breathe, you're not going to achieve the physiological adaptations that you're looking to. You're just probably going to make it harder work to breathe. And yeah, you might increase your respiratory muscle training slightly, but it's not the main goal, and it's impacting the larger gains that you're trying to go from. So that's hypothetically, you might be getting an extra 1% and losing out on an extra 10%. So your net loss is 9%. All easy cherry pick numbers there, not actually representative of what's happening. But yeah, like you touched on there, it's for lower intensity, and when you're at rest, there's benefits to it. I think we'll be going into those further down the line on this as well. So it's not that it's completely to be dismissed. It's just that the claims that are coming around this of increasing your VO2 max, increasing your performance at high intensity, increasing your time trial performance are factually incorrect.
I think the practical use cases that you've come up with for nasal strips, despite being skeptical coming into this, but you've come up with some practical use cases. I think they're closely tied to the benefits of nasal breathing. And so we'll get to them in a bit. But before we do, the reason you decided to take a much closer look at nasal strips and the pros and cons and whether they're genuine or not is because athletes that you coach are actually asking you, is this something I should be investing in? Should I be wearing these?
Yeah. So over the years, whenever something comes out that the World Tour is doing it, whether it's consuming 120 grams of carbs an hour or beyond, I'll have someone ask me that and say it's a junior rider who is not using 100 grams of carbs an hour even. And they're asking about, should I be consuming 120 grams of carbs? Because that's what the pros are doing. And normally what gets highlighted in marketing and publicity is what the professional men are doing. That's a whole other kettle of fish to get into. And then heat training as well. People asking, like, should I be doing this all the time? Blood flow restricted. You've got people wondering, should I be tying like a tourniquet around my leg while I'm training? So yeah, the latest one has been nose strips. Should I be buying these? Should I be training with these? Should I be covering my mouth with tape and focusing on breathing through my nose? And yeah, whenever I get people asking me questions about this, rather than give a subjective opinion, I will look into it more thoroughly, look around the research, some subjective elements to it are actually important to consider. Cycling's obsessed with objective measures and numbers, but the subjective side of things is equally important. I mean, the placebo effect is still one of the biggest performance enhancers potentially out there. If someone thinks that something's helping them, they can tend to perform better. But yeah, that's another nice rabbit hole to go down.
Especially if they think it's not a placebo.
Yeah, and that's where sort of looking into the nasal strips in more detail. Okay, I mean, looking at the claims of, like I've said already, with the increased VO2 max at a maximal capacity, that is not factually correct. I think the only way they might be doing this is potentially cherry picking some elements of science and not elaborating fully. So, for example, if you were to tape your mouth closed and breathe solely through your nose, you'd probably achieve a higher relative VO2 max using the nasal strips than if you didn't. But it's never going to be as high as your VO2 max as if you were just breathing using your mouth anyway. So it's kind of like, I can't say for certain what they're using for their claims, but that's the sort of best guess I can see as to how they are stating that it improves VO2 max, because in any other capacity, it does not.
And yeah, you're not just saying it doesn't. You've actually, there has been some research done on this, and you've sort of read through those papers and come to this conclusion based on the actual findings.
Yeah, so really good one is a meta-analysis where essentially you'll get researchers will go through the available literature that's been over the last few years and look at the results of there and deem what effects something has. So Dinardi et al. 2021 did a meta-analysis of this, and for VO2 max, heart rate, rate of perceived exertion in healthy individuals during exercise using nasal dilator strips, there was no statistically significant effect. And I mean, in the sports science world, to deem something as statistically significant, you basically need a 95% confidence ratio. So it's kind of out of the results you're seeing, there has to be such a difference that you can be 95% confident that that is, in fact, a difference you are seeing and not just tiny little variations that could be within the margin of error. So big meta-analysis of many studies looking into this comes to the conclusion that there is no significant effect on VO2 max, heart rate, RPE when using these nasal strips.
But that's kind of exactly what the marketing around these nasal strips promises.
Yeah, exactly. There was another study in 2017 that was Adams, and that was looking specifically in trained cyclists and using both external dilators, which are the nose strips, and internal dilators, which are the internal sort of pushing the nostrils out, that there was zero improvement on 20-kilometer time trial performance or cycling economy. So there have been no studies that have found any benefit towards any sort of peak power production or peak oxygen consumption or improving economy at intensities at that level. So all of the science says that they do not do what the apparent claims are stating they do. But then it gets quite interesting because it's looking into areas where they're not actually claiming any benefit. It's kind of where there is potential for some benefit for the right circumstances and the right people. It's very circumstantial of a lot of things. And a bit like when you were chatting with Tom, a lot of things, it depends. So it's an annoying phrase. It's the most common thing you end up using. It's then being able to explain why it depends. And of people asking me specific questions, should they be using these nose strips, vary based on the kind of efforts they're doing, their own circumstantial situations to do with what the event is like, what their even things like allergies are. There's lots of various factors. And that's where it got quite interesting reading more into it, because there's a lot of factors where can show some potential benefit. And if you sort of extrapolate that and apply it to the event demands of certain types of cycling events or for certain people, there are potential benefits to be found, although there's not really much in terms of scientific research on it. So some of this is sort of theoretical application of it, and other parts of it are subjective perceptions from riders in these circumstances.
This is interesting though, because much like yourself, I was skeptical of nasal strips, but you approached them with the same skepticism, but you've actually found potential use cases for them. And so correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your end recommendation to the athletes who have been asking you whether or not they should use these is kind of, well, maybe, yeah, probably. It's not going to do any harm. And for these reasons you're about to tell us, that you've decided it's probably worth it.
Yeah, the thing with using things like nasal dilators is there's not really a negative association with them. The only thing I can see is like having an adhesive on your nose, high sweat rate, you might get spots or uncomfortable skin issues there. So anything with adhesives applied to the skin, you want to make sure that you're not going to be allergic to anything, which is something not often considered when testing stuff like this out. So I remember Super Sapiens glucose monitor, I was testing that out, and I got a horrific rash around my arm just because did not agree with that little metallic thread that went through, and I got slightly infected. So yeah, always test whether you're allergic to things or not, and make sure you've not got any allergies, and then look at these devices and check what makeup the adhesive has in it. That's a little thing that people should probably do as well.
Definitely.
But yeah, in terms of sort of like going into what the potential benefits are, it's quite an interesting one, because it was touched on how at lower intensities there are benefits to nasal breathing. And a bit of sort of background as to why nasal breathing is generally better to go for than mouth breathing is mainly because our nose is our filtration system. So the nose is full of lots of little hairs, some of them almost the consistency of like vibrissae, I think it's how to pronounce it, basically whiskers. And combined with mucus, snot, they work to filter pollutants, small little particles that can cause illness or just irritation. And that gets trapped in the mucus, and you blow your nose and you dispatch of it. It's not going into the respiratory tract system. You're not risking getting any sort of upper respiratory tract infections or allergens coming in. So your nose is incredibly useful for that. And you quite often see people who've got issues like a deviated septum and they're having to mouth breathe. They're more likely to get illnesses during things like the commute to work or just socialize with people. And the problem with high intensity exercise and cycling, especially at the world tour level in those grand tours, you are putting yourself under the kind of physiological strain where your immune system is quite compromised, especially if you're peaking for this event and you've trimmed down your body composition to a level that is not deemed healthy long term. You put yourself in a position where you're much more likely to pick up illnesses. It's like probably the biggest reason for abandonments in grand tours is respiratory issues. You see Mathieu van der Poel had pneumonia mildly at the Tour de France, upper respiratory tract infections, bronchitis, all sorts of things like that tend to be the main things that afflict riders. And if you think about with a lot of World Tour cycling, they are riding at not a particularly high intensity if you're just in the bunch. If you're not working on the front, it's a flat stage, you're not in the break, you're sitting around at what is a very easy intensity for these riders. And they're going to be breathing through their nose for a lot of it. And so if you can increase the relative intensity that you can maintain nasal breathing before you have to switch to breathing through your mouth, you reduce the amount of air that is passing through your mouth, which has no filtration system. I mean, during the COVID times, we saw when COVID was there, it would sweep through the peloton as more riders got it because they're breathing in the air. You reduce the incidences of picking up illnesses like that if you are breathing through the nose. So that's one of the kind of potential benefits of it. And as well, a lot of time riders spend not riding the bike. They're sitting at the table, they're eating, they're on the bus, they're in the room, they're trying to sleep. And then you've got the potential benefit of improved sleep quality, or even if you're a snorer, you're going to improve your relationship with your teammate who you're sharing the room with massively if you stop that. So it's all these little potential areas of benefit that are not actually highlighted. So increasing the relative intensity, you can maintain nose breathing, potentially improving sleep quality and reducing the potential incidences of breathing in pollutants that aren't being filtered. And then the other benefit is you see with World Tour cycling now is essentially it's an eating competition because they are working at such an intensity, and sort of the old way of thinking of fat burning and then down your carbs before the climb at the finish has completely shifted. People are eating constantly now, going to the team car, grabbing food. Although things like drinks and gels, they're easy to consume. When you're consuming probably about 1,000 calories an hour is not unrealistic for some of these riders during races. You can't just do that through drinks and gels, or else you get gastrointestinal issues. So you've got to start eating more solid foods. Also just things like flavor fatigue. So when you're eating solid foods, you get this on rise. If you're eating something like a flapjack and you're going up a climb, it's not easy because you're chewing and you're trying to breathe in between chews, and it's an absolute shambles. So if you can do something that increases your capacity to breathe better through your nose while your mouth is busy chewing, there's another little potential gain there. Maybe you're on a climb and you're feeling that you need to eat something, but you're thinking, I can't eat at this intensity or I'm going to struggle to get enough air in. then that nasal dilator is going to help in that situation. And this is where it comes down to that circumstantial point. I mean, these are all, I think, benefits that are to be had from these nasal strips, but it's not anything that's actually being marketed. And again, it's quite circumstantial because if I'm doing my local handicap series of races, it's flat out from the gun. I'm breathing through my mouth the entire time, and I'm not having time to eat any solid foods or work in an intensity that I could even if I had a nasal dilator. So in that situation, it's not worth it for me. And that's where it's the circumstantial, that it depends. So would a nasal dilator work for me in the events I'm doing? No. Would it be beneficial for a World Tour rider who is having to eat lots and really be careful about picking up illness? Yes, there are benefits there, just not the ones that brands are actually claiming there to be. And we spoke a bit about this as well, like other situations where that could be beneficial. And you've got ultra endurance events where riders are riding specifically at quite a low intensity. And for example, with Badlands, so it's 800 kilometers through a desert. You're not going to be riding at any intensity that is above your first lactate threshold. Maybe pop above it a little bit on some of the climbs, but you want to limit the amount of fatigue metabolites you're generating. So you're working at a lower intensity where you could be nose breathing. And over that duration, again, the last thing you want is to pick up illnesses or like multi-day events where you're going around the coast of Ireland, for example. You don't want to be picking up illnesses during that period. So having something that can improve your capacity to use your filtration passageways more when cycling, your nostrils, there is circumstantial benefit to that. And it's a shame that brands aren't actually picking up on that, because that is a genuine benefit to it. I mean, there's certain elements that could be useful in day-to-day life. I mean, I don't think like the junior riders I coach, I don't think they're going to want to go into school with a pink nose strip on them. But like the big thing with riders over the winter months, and that what they end up losing time with training is picking up illness. You see at the moment, all the kids are going back to school. It's the general back to school illnesses. Everyone is picking them up. I've had about a dozen people say, oh, I've got a cold at the moment. And it's all like, schools are back. Yep, right on cue. And then next week, uni starts. That'll be the next round of illnesses flying around. Christmas, you get everyone gathered together and you always get illnesses coming around. So it has its uses, I believe, in terms of reducing the incidence of getting ill, because that in itself, it is a performance gain. Because if you spend less time ill, you're spending more time being able to train, being able to recover properly, being able to improve. So it's not that these dilators even necessarily have a direct impact on the day performance. It's how they impact the overall, to use the term, performance process.
Very good. Like it. I mean, so much that, why are the brands not claiming these benefits? Because, claiming that it's going to improve your VO2 max is just sexier, for lack of a better term. It grabs the attention better than saying, oh, if you wear this, you might not get sick, which might lead to better performance 6 months from now. So I can understand why they haven't gone down this route. It's
a general problem with marketing that objective measures and things that are quantifiable are far easier to market. So even like with Aero Kit, it's still difficult to market that. And you get people market it with how many watts saved. Maybe they'll say at what speed you save it. But that's how it's getting better at being marketed, because now there's numbers being put on it. Right? You can say if you are doing this event at this speed and you wear this helmet and we've tested in the tunnel and it will be 5 watts quicker on this person, then theoretically you should be 30 seconds quicker over your event. It's a nice quantifiable number that they will then apply to themselves. We won't get back into that whole it depends thing. And they think, yeah, I can buy that. Or it's why weight in cycling is such a big sales point, because the fact of the matter is, like, your S-Works Tarmac SL8 versus your Tarmac Expert SL8, the frame is exactly the same mold. It's the same aerodynamic performance. This brand claims it's the same stiffness. The only difference is maybe 100, 150 grams weight difference. And that, in terms of actually a performance benefit, even on climbs, is minuscule. You're looking at a handful of seconds over a 20-minute climb, done at 300 watts on a 5% gradient at 70 kilos. But it's a gain. And that's what's quantifiable and easy to sell, because in your head, you're going to think, right, if I go to a race and the guy on the S-Works beats me by 2 seconds, I know if I'd been on the S-Works as well, I'd have beaten him. And it's getting into psychology. So a nasal strip that says this will increase your VO2 max by 1%, or even 0.5%, it's a number and you can put it into sort of theory and say, right, if I use this, I'm quicker, regardless of every other factor imaginable. It will make me quicker, even if 0.5%. Saying this will stop you getting ill so you can train more effectively, which over the course of a season, not missing out on 2 weeks of training and a couple of weeks of getting back into form and recovering, will probably result in a higher gain. It's not as easily quantifiable, so it's not very marketable. And that's what brands have to do. They have to balance up marketing and fact sometimes.
Which is, I guess, where they also put them on the noses of pros and stuff, because quite often we've seen the hype around them at the tour because Visma Lease Bike were all wearing these. That's bigger than the VO2 Max claims. It's probably the fact that the pros are using these. I want to try them is probably the bigger driver around all this. Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.